Another thing we almost never do is tell the story of redemption at sentencing. In other words, every judge wants to know not just why did you do what you did, but how do I know you're not going to do it again? We know they're going to get out, most of our folks, at some point. We want some confidence that they're going to be able to lead productive lives. And more importantly, lawyers who think this is all like social work and touchy feely, and that's not my problem, where they go, what program they do. It is, because your job is to make sure the judge understands that your client has a plan for his life or her life, that they've thought about what they've done wrong, that they feel badly about what they've done wrong, and that their goal is to make sure they don't do that again. Over 1 million Americans face sentencing every year, and it will be the most important day of their lives. But we don't fully understand the system, how broken it is, and what we can do to make it better. I'm Doug Passon. I'm a 25-year criminal defense lawyer and a sentencing expert. My goal is to bring more awareness, more fairness, and more humanity to the sentencing process. So, are you ready? Then let's get set for sentencing. Hey everybody, Doug Passon coming to you from Studio 3553 in Scottsdale, Arizona. So cool that we are now into the 100s in our podcast episodes. We just had our 100th episode a little while ago, and we're going to keep rolling with this. And I am so excited to have my guest today, who, as you know, basically, well, look, before I get there, you know, if you've been listening to this podcast, I've been doing a deep dive into the Federal Bureau of Prisons in all of its gore and glory over this last 100 or so episodes. And I've had the privilege to bring a bunch of diverse perspectives to bear on the situation there on the ground. And it's been former inmates, it's been current inmates, it's been current prison employees, it's been former high-level BOP officials. And so there's been a ton of podcasts. I hope you've heard them, but if not, I'm going to drop a whole list of them in the show notes, because we're going to continue on that vein today with a really, really amazing special guest. I am adding a new star to the constellation of BOP experts that are orbiting my universe, and I'm so excited to introduce Dr. Alix McLearen, former BOP official. We're going to talk about all her qualifications in a second, but I just wanted to say hello, Dr. McLearen. How are you? And thank you so much for coming on Set for Sentencing.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Doug. I'm excited to be here.
Yay. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Dr. McLearen, and she's going to tell you a little bit more, but really, really high level official for the BOP. She had a really illustrious career spanning 30 years there. She's a clinical psychologist, and she started out in that capacity at the institution and just kind of worked her way up, and eventually becomes acting assistant director, like for the entire BOP for many years. But what I love about Dr. McLearen, and what we're going to really try to focus our conversation on today, is this is the person who really can claim the badge of honor for creating meaningful policy and programming, really the programs in the BOP, starting from, PREA coordinators, the skills program, which is what I really want to talk about, which is where we send folks with conditions like autism and other challenges that they'd experience before they go into the general population. So she has so much information to offer that we really haven't even scratched the surface yet. So this is going to be very interesting, very new, and very informative conversation, and I can't wait to dig in. So okay, so I gave the big picture of you, but now give me some of the fine detail. What would you want our listeners to know about your background and experience coming up in the BOP?
Okie doke. Well, I am a clinical psychologist by training, and apparently once a psychologist, always a psychologist, even though I moved up into executive roles out of that. But I started out, finished my PhD in clinical psychology and law from the University of Alabama. Oh, back in 2003, and started out as an intern with the Bureau of Prisons and then became a psychologist at the biggest complex down in Coleman, Florida. That is where I had my first supervisory job, which was, in fact, the skills program that I know we'll talk about later. From there, I went over to the Federal Correctional Institution in Memphis as chief psychologist. After that, I moved into headquarters. I did some work as a sexual dangerousness expert and then moved into more executive roles. The first being as a national branch chief, which I was the first of what is now called the Women in Special Populations branch. So building, implementing, creating policies, creating programs for first women and people who are transgender, people with disabilities, individuals in prisons that are veterans, that are parents, and that are aging. So for each of those populations, doing some programmatic work, doing a lot of training for staff as well as for the outside world, partnering with stakeholders, and really putting in place the services and processes that each of these unique populations needed to have to make sure that they were being treated fairly and getting the services that they were supposed to be receiving. Um, from there, I became first the senior deputy assistant director and then the acting assistant director for the reentry services division. So, between those two roles, the number one or number two of that division served on the agency executive staff. The reentry services division was created back in 2014. That's when reentry really started becoming a buzzword. And our then director, Charles Samuels, kind of recognized the need that, hey, we lump all this security stuff together with all of the treatment stuff. And we really need to separate those out if we're going to prioritize the half of the mission that is helping people and rehabilitating or even habilitating people. So I was in that division from the beginning and ended up leading it for several years. The division, in addition to psychology, which is kind of the jewel in the crown, if you will, with all the programs and all the rehabilitative work. BOP is one of the largest employers of doctoral level psychologists. You also have education, chaplaincy, the Women in Special Populations branch that I mentioned, and then all of our transitional work, which includes about 200 odd halfway houses. Um,
Wow.
I was in that role during the passage of the First Step Act. And so I led a lot of the program development and implementation work. And then, less relevant to what we're going to talk about today, but I did serve towards the end of my career as the acting director of the National Institute of Corrections. I was appointed by the Attorney General, and that is the agency that serves the 750,000 correctional professionals in the United States across state, local, and federal systems, working to kind of shape the training, provide technical assistance, helping everybody who works in these fields have access to the most cutting edge science that should be defining what we're doing in corrections.
Nice. Well, this is a perfect example. I've never heard of the Reentry Services Division before and the mission and the bifurcation there. So this is like this is so, you know, we lawyers, when most of the time when after our clients get sentenced, they go off to BOP, we don't necessarily hear from them. We don't know all this. And I keep trying to say that, so much of what happens there is relevant to our work at sentencing to make sure that we're aware of the ins and outs of the BOP and the programs that exist and where a client may be best served for placement, because we know that in the federal system, you can go anywhere in the country, ostensibly. You can ask a judge for a recommendation to go here, there, and everywhere. And so it really is incumbent on lawyers to have at least a general sense of the kinds of programs and policies that exist. So I will say, of all the fingers you've had in all the pies over the years, do you have like any darlings, like some of the programs that you're most proud of that you think have had the most positive impact at the BOP?
I do. And one of them is skills. It was a wonderful job. People often think of prisons as places where ugly and dark things are the only things that happen. And I'm not here to say that ugly and dark things don't happen there, but I am definitely here to say that some beautiful, amazing acts of kindness and humanity have there and I happen there. And I saw that most clearly once we really operationalized what skills was and got it off the ground there because we used, and I know I'll talk about this later, but just one little story.
Yeah.
We used what's now called a peer support model. Back then we called it mentoring. And that meant that you had the people that were participating in the programs that needed the services, but it meant that you also had other sentenced individuals that were managing their time better, that were doing okay functionally and didn't need the program, but that were volunteering to live on that unit, sometimes with people that were pretty sick, and help them out. And we played a basketball game on Fridays. Back then we would do some kind of like group activity or sports event or something in recreation. And it was the mentors against the program participants. And many of the mentors were people that had incredible fitness skills and not so many of the people participating in the program. And the great lengths that they went to lose the game and make the participants feel good, people don't expect to see things there. And it was just awesome.
You
Um,
sure it wasn't just a gambling operation where everybody was going to bet on the jocks and then they threw the game to win the? No, I'm just kidding.
I'm pretty positive there it was pretty heartfelt and got a lot of folks to come out and watch and cheer,
Oh, I
have a
love that.
positive experience. But
I
I would like
love
to
that.
talk about another program.
Yes.
Um, and that is the F.I.T program, which is something that I, along with two of my colleagues, designed more recently. And we actually won a big national award for it a few years ago for innovation. I mentioned that one of my roles was really building and launching this branch for women and making sure that we had not just parity, but gender responsive services in place for women in custody. And when we look at programs in the BOP, we have more men. We just, by the numbers game, right? There's about 7% women and everybody else in the system falls into the male bucket. So you're not going to have as much variety of programs, but there weren't all these residential programs that we'll talk about today. There wasn't as much of that for women because you didn't have the numbers to fill them. So what we did was looking at the literature on what women need, looking at the literature on providing integrated treatment instead of one thing at a time, we figured out a way to give those same kind of intensive program services to women. And we decided to run an entire institution that we built and designed from the ground up. I mean, the actual physical structure with communal spaces for women who are more verbal and more community oriented, up in Danbury, Connecticut. And F.I.T is female integrated treatment. We offer substance use treatment, treatment for some more serious mental health symptoms, trauma treatment, because we know up to 90% of women in carceral settings have trauma. And then we offer vocational opportunities. Everybody at that institution is part of the program in some form or another. They get an individualized treatment plan. They're able to have RDAP. It gave us the ability to put that program in the Northeast, which is highly desirable.
By the way, so not everyone knows what
Oh.
that is, but residential drug, yeah, that's okay. Residential drug and alcohol program. It's intensive treatment, and you can earn some time off your sentence for completing it. Yeah,
Yes. So people
yeah,
didn't have to go away from their families to get that. We found a way to meet the
yeah.
standards of the law and put all those programs
Nice.
together. So we
Do
have
you?
expanded that.
Oh,
Um,
keep go. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I think that's the gist of it.
I wanted to know is there a custody qualification? Like, who do you have to have a minimum? Is it a minimum? Is it a camp? A minimum? Does it matter?
It
Who?
really does not. It is inside. Women's security levels are a little different than men's in
Oh,
BOP in that you don't have medium and high in the same way. That women are either minimum or low, with the exception of a small handful of women. At one point, the unit had 6 people. That is a high security unit
oh,
that
wow. Okay.
is over in Carswell. But so you don't, it's not as much of an issue. Pretty much any woman could go there outside of that very tiny handful of a couple of folks that have been put into a secure unit.
Nice. So basically, any client you have, female client, that's a potential recommendation for placement in a at sentencing, is what I'm hearing, right? Yeah.
Yes, that
Okay.
needs, if you don't want a program and you don't want services, maybe that's not the
No,
place.
yeah. But
Um,
I know the statistics. I mean, what percentage of women who end up in prison are victims of domestic violence or other kinds of abuse, like
a lot. The
a
data is
lot.
not great on trauma generally. That's why I say upwards of 90% of women potentially. But when you really go back and look at the data, how you define a trauma, are we looking at adverse childhood experiences, or are we looking at things that happened later?
Yeah.
But what we find, and not just with women, let me be clear, the type and the chronic nature of the trauma might be different for women, but we find a lot of trauma in men as well, which is why when I was in RSD and leading the division, we rolled out trauma treatment across all the female facilities, but also at a bunch of the male facilities. We had to, and this was my friend and colleague Allison who worked on this. But what we learned during our time there, which is a funny, cute story, if you will, is the trauma treatment it's the same. It's a cognitive behavioral model, but where we would call things seeking safety, which is the name of a program for women, we were calling it seeking strength with men. And then suddenly it became more popular. And
Mm,
where it was journaling with women, which is a popular therapeutic technique that's effective, it was
yeah.
writing in your logbook for men, and making these little tweaks really made the program more palatable for folks who needed it. But
Uh-huh.
you don't want to necessarily come off as weak.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I think that's not lost on the folks that do my work is that all of our clients come to us with damage and they're all suffering from trauma, from substance abuse, from mental health issues, you name it. And it's always that suffering that got them in the trouble. There's a direct line to it. So it makes perfect sense that, in an ideal world where you're going to a quote unquote correctional system, that there would be meaningful efforts to correct those, help them fix that which is broken in their life. So I'd love to hear these stories. And, I've spent a lot of time begging, talking shit about how messed up the BOP is. And that's not what we're doing here today because as you mentioned, there are some bright spots. It's far from perfect, but the skills program is really meaningful to me. And so for people who don't know what that is, we're gonna explain it. But the reason I even know about, and you'd be surprised how many lawyers have never heard of the skills program. But the reason I know about it is because I represent a lot of clients accused of crimes who are on the autism spectrum. And the first story that we tell about what life would be like for them in prison is how vulnerable they are. They're vulnerable socially. They're limited in the way that they can interact socially. They're very naive sometimes, so they're vulnerable to being taken advantage of. They're vulnerable to running afoul of the rules because autistic people are by and large rule followers, but there's two sets of rules. There's the institution's rules and there's the inmates' rules. They're vulnerable to the sensory issues that they confront, if it's whether it's loud noises or pungent smells, or they have limited foods they can eat, or the textures of their clothing. And what the judges need to understand is that, punishment is punishment, but for someone on the spectrum, it's off the charts. In other words, every day that they serve is exponentially more punitive, can be, than a neurotypical person who doesn't have those added challenges, right? And so we're always telling the story of prison. And then we say, in order to try to, you know, ameliorate some of these issues, there is this program called the Skills Program. And so you're the one who created this program. So like I'm so excited. So tell me the origin story of the skills, where it is, and what it is, and then we'll dig in from there.
All right, sounds good. If you will bear with me for like 2 minutes, I think
Yeah,
it would be helpful to listeners to understand programs generally.
good.
So that there's a framework to hang skills on, if you will. And I promise I'll do it quick. I began practicing as a psychologist and working in corrections during a time when there was a lot of growth and change going on, both psychology really getting solid grounding in CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, and saying this is an evidence-based approach, and then corrections professionalizing and moving towards understanding what an evidence-based approach is, right? Prisons aren't just places that you put people, but that there is some science about once people go there, what can be effective in helping them to get out and not come back again. So the Bureau of Prisons had long provided the RDAP program that I mentioned earlier, residential drug abuse program. This is very robust, well-researched program. And this was an early iteration, but it was based in the therapeutic community model. And this is important for skills. So I promise I'm getting somewhere.
No worries.
Therapeutic communities are basically community as method. Everybody that is in whatever the treatment is, which it started with substance use, is someone that abuses or uses substances and is striving for being better. So people help each other. Therapeutic communities that are based outside of prison are very democratic. So in prison, we use a modified therapeutic community. It allows more flexibility. Individuals still live and work together, but there are rules and oversights consistent with security and the prison environment, so you don't have somebody taking advantage of somebody else. So we had that in the RDAP program. And what we were realizing as a profession around the time that I was working as a psychologist at Coleman, which is where the first skills program was located, is that this modified therapeutic community approach was very applicable to other disorders, illnesses, and issues and just life challenges, not just substance use. So they had started a unit down there where they wanted to help people with special needs. But there was no operational definition, there was no standardized curriculum, the science hadn't been brought in. And I applied for and was chosen to take on that role of creating a true program that followed the MTC principles, that followed a CBT model. So I started by looking, at the scientific literature and saying, how can we grow this into a place that is safe, that adheres to what the research says, but that fits the needs of our community, which was more challenging than you would think because our community, our participants, had issues with the cognitive process, right? That's the population we were targeting in skills, and cognitive behavioral therapy, it literally has the word in the title. It's using that lots of journaling and writing and thinking about these things that folks with cognitive impairments are going to struggle with. So we tried to figure out, who do we really want to get here? One of the changes that we made to just having a unit where anybody could go is, we're going to take referrals from psychologists. If we're going to make this a treatment program, then people who have the expertise to know what's going on with somebody need to be involved in sending people. And we're going to take people not just from this local compound, but from all over the agency. Yes, there are a number of people that have cognitive issues, but they are not all just by happenstance in Coleman. So we need to open this up and make sure, if we're going to build this community, that it has all folks working on the same issues. We recognize that a lot of the folks that had cognitive impairments or neurotypical and neurodiverse were not words at they were words. They were not words in the common vernacular at that time. So, but that's what we were getting at, right? Like, we want to differentiate somebody who's aggressive and acting out just for antisocial reasons from somebody who may have acted out aggressively, but it's because of an impairment that is either in the mental health or intellectual realm. And these folks are at risk to being victimized. We were finding that a lot of folks with that diagnostic cluster were winding up in restrictive housing settings. Their points were going up, so their custody level was going up because they were getting in trouble. Sometimes it's because they were seeking protection or were scared or confused or victimized. Nonetheless, they were ending up in higher security places where they were even more prone to struggling or being victimized. And then maybe they got in trouble because they were fearful and they lashed out, and we just had this cycle. So,
Mm.
okay, we're going to make this population people that have a cognitive impairment that is impacting their functioning in a chronic way. And these are the possible diagnoses that could fit into here. And autism spectrum disorder was one. Also, like organic brain disease and intellectual impairment stuff in that space, but say differentiating it from just substance use. Or, we were able to create another different program later for people where it was serious mental illness that was the root of it and that they needed more acute treatment.
Hmm.
Anyway, we created this safe space and then we looked at besides CBT, what else do they need? Well, we decided we needed a teacher, that this was going to be multidisciplinary. A lot of these folks did have some intellectual need. So we hired a special education teacher that was part of the unit so that getting a GED or just learning to read could go alongside the development of skills. And then right around that time, a body of research was growing around something called social skills training, which is exactly what it sounds like. So we made that part of the curriculum. But then we still had the group process and everybody coming together and people holding each other accountable and people making a space that they have a role in. Everybody had a responsibility, a job, if you will, in the community, whether they were on this committee or that committee. And the space was painted to reflect the ideals of the community. And then just because of the size of units in prison, having that many individuals who were struggling with some of the issues that we are talking about today, that would be a very large and difficult to manage treatment program. So we paired them with the peer support individuals who then became part of the community, but were not in treatment. They were instead learning peer support roles. The program is now at a second site in Danbury, also a male facility, low security. So Coleman is the medium and can take high security folks, and then Danbury is the low and can take low or camp individuals. There was approval for a secure skills program for the highest security, the folks whose points are just so high that they couldn't
Yeah.
be managed or wouldn't be managed at a lower security facility. And I believe that's still waiting to launch.
Interesting. What about, is there, would it, maybe this is a pipe dream, but any chance there would be another facility more Western that people would be able to go to? The reason I ask is I have somebody who, it's the first really amazing, powerful feedback I got about the Danbury Skills Program from a mother of an autistic young man who said, I hate to say it, but this has been amazing for him. Nobody wants to say a prison's been wonderful, but
Sure.
just in terms of him having more agency and ownership and responsibility and learning these important life skills, um she's seen the transformation in her son, but she lives in Alaska,
Yeah.
and this is a lot of these kids on the spectrum. I call them kids, they're adults, but if you look at some of their real functioning, they're children in many ways, from a clinical standpoint, right? But a lot of these folks have never been away from home ever, and their mother or their father are their lifeline. And so to be all the way across the country with limited interaction with family members has to be, just agonizing for both mom and son. And then sometimes it's, flying all the way across country for a visit, and there's fog, and so it's a security risk, so there's no visitation, or there's a staffing issue, sorry, visitations canceled. I mean, it is a really, really high burden, and I love the fact that he's in the exact right place for him, but it breaks my heart that there's this other problem to overcome. And it seems like it would be a pretty simple matter. Can't we just have more of these?
Okay, so let me say a couple of things in response to that. I mean,
Okay.
you can. But I'll get to that. First, of course, I'm no longer in a decision-making role because I retired.
Right. Right.
Um, One problem that has been a constant for the Bureau of Prisons is it is so big. It's everywhere. It's not in every state, but it's in a lot of states. And it's very political where a prison itself goes. And then to spread the resources, especially when you're talking about something that is designed for a finite population to make it everywhere. It's just a challenge of a large system that you wouldn't have if you're talking about Delaware or, so
Mhm.
that's just a reality. But the second piece is no, there's no reason why that couldn't happen. When you look at the data, I won't say autism specifically is poorly understood, but the diagnostic criteria have changed. I mean, I think it's still an
Oh, I
emergent.
think it's very fair to say that it's poorly understood.
I
It's
think
in
it's
my
more,
experience,
um,
it's that's why the DSM keeps changing
right.
because we're just
Um,
figuring this out as we go.
but if you look at the limited research out there, it suggests that about 5%, give or take, of the adult prison population is probably on the spectrum. And
Mhm.
then you've got the fact that skills isn't just for people with autism, skills is also for people with other kind of neurodiverse issues that make prison difficult to navigate. And that raises the number of people that would be eligible and that would benefit from that program. So when you look at it that way, then yeah, why wouldn't there be another one? And there are a variety of considerations that need to be taken into account when you launch a new program. You want to put it at a place that can hire staff. So if it's very, very, very remote and always struggles to get specialists or psychologists or whatever it is that you need, then it's not a good place for it. You want to make sure it has the physical layout, right? Some of the prisons are just very old and they don't lend themselves to like group spaces where you'd have community meetings and the like. But
Mhm.
but barring that, certainly there are places on the West Coast. So it was a long answer of saying, no, there's no reason that that couldn't happen. I think you're aware that BOP is struggling with a lot of challenges right now,
Yeah.
staffing amongst them. So,
Well, okay. So that's a goal. It's a good goal. I'll have to put that on my list of things to do. Get the BOP to open a skills program in the Western. Thinking Arizona, Colorado, maybe California. Well, anyway, I'm sure it'll be just super easy peasy. Well, here's my next question. How long can an individual stay in skills? I mean, ideally, this young man who got a 5 year sentence will be able to serve his entire time there. I'm told it's a limited time, but he's been there still, so I don't know. Like, what's the
okay. So
rule?
I'm going to do what I've done all along here and answer your question with a lot more things than you asked me. Uh,
Awesome.
I think it is helpful if I describe something. I described that BOP programs are modified therapeutic communities and that we try to target them towards specific issues and that are CBT. But we have a variety of different residential and then non-residential programs. And you can find this information, and I think the people that listen to your podcast will want to. We created a directory when I was there that is available publicly. It's to be updated at least twice a year that lists where the programs are and generally what their criteria are. And so for something like skills, but also maybe it turns out skills isn't the best place. You're the individual you're working with, he's not struggling with these basic functional skills. He's struggling with cutting himself a lot and dealing with frustration. And so maybe that's a better fit for the stages program. Or he's new to the system and young and has a lot of violence, and maybe he's a better fit for the brave program. So we divide programs into residential and non-residential. Residential is like skills, where you can live in the unit versus living in a regular unit and getting outpatient services in some other kind of program. You can see where all of that stuff is. The second thing is there is policy on this. BOP makes the majority of its policies public, and there is a psychology treatment programs policy, and that is what it's called, that explains the specifics of the program and how to get in and what will cause your removal. And now the wild card that answers your question. When there is bed space available and someone is doing well, these are programs that are meant to be individualized. So while they may have a time to complete the program attached to them, not everybody is going to sail through on the first round of things. Some people need more, and that's okay. If they're doing well there, maybe they're maintained in a more mentoring role as a graduate. So there is no clear answer. At some point, it is possible that bed space could need to become available, and and that person is doing well enough that they can live outside the unit and continue to practice what they learned there. But it's other than with RDAP, which is a little more cut and dry because it's staged at the end of one sentence and includes a community component. Most of the residential programs, like skills, don't necessarily have a clear start and end. They last approximately this amount of time, and sometimes there's a reason for somebody to stay there longer.
I heard that approximately this amount of time is something like 18 months. Is that right or no?
Generally,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
but there are
It's
always
flexible.
outliers. There just always are.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, ideally, I mean, you talk about a safe space, and to me, that's the bottom line. Like, ideally, you want our clients, especially our vulnerable clients, to just be in a place that's not going to do any more, that they're not going to come out worse than they went in as a result of this. So I guess that's encouraging to know that it's not a hard and fast thing, 18 months and bye-bye. And I know that's certainly not been the case with this particular client I'm talking about. I don't know that I knew there was a directory which lists all where all the programs are and what the criteria are, and that it's updated twice a year. So I'm definitely going to get that link and put it in the show notes. Is maybe a good time to plug my mentor and colleague Alan Ellis, who for many years has written the Federal Prison Guidebook, which is just basically a compendium of every BOP facility and all the programs that they offer there. I know a lot of judges have that at their ready. But this is another practice pointer for my people, which is telling the story of prison comes in many forms and facets. So I talked about the punishment aspect and how more severe punishment will be for people with these particular vulnerabilities. But just in general, another thing we almost never do is tell the story of redemption at sentencing. In other words, every judge wants to know not just why did you do what you did, but how do I know you're not going to do it again? That this idea of deterrence. We can talk about general deterrence another day because I think that's preposterous. That guy got a lot of time, therefore I'm never going to do anything wrong. Silliness. I don't even know how people with this much education in their lifetime could ever buy into that absolute absurdity. But oh, I'm on a rant now. Wait, no, no. But specific deterrence is a thing, right? A person, especially for recidivists and everything else, we want some confidence that we know they're going to get out, most of our folks at some point. We want some confidence that they're going to be able to lead productive lives. And more importantly, lawyers who think this is all like social work and touchy feely, and that's not my problem where they go, what program they do. It is, because your job is to make sure the judge understands that your client has a plan for his life or her life, that they've thought about what they've done wrong, that they feel badly about what they've done wrong, and that their goal is to make sure they don't do that again. And you can say that until the cows come home and it's just words. But how much more powerful would it be if we had, like, I don't know, an Alix McLearen who came in to consult and say, you know what, your client has, I clearly, this issue, this issue, this issue. And just so you know, there's this particular program that none of us have ever heard of in our lifetime, I guarantee you, that would really be beneficial for you. And so this is what you need to do to kind of build the record to make, the judge can recommend anything. The BOP doesn't have to follow it, but you want to make sure that the PSR and all the information that goes to the BOP when they're doing their classification is right, is complete, and tells the story so that you can actually achieve that goal. But how powerful, my people, to be able to go into court and say, listen, we've given this a lot of thought. And my client is genuinely interested in changing their life. And guess what? There's this amazing program out in Poughkeepsie, and we hope that you consider that, judge. And that's good in the short term for our sentencing arguments to give them credibility and heft, but it's good in the long term because ultimately, don't we care how our people turn out in this journey that they're on, right? So you could do that. That's part of what you do, right? I mean, say if someone were going to just hire you to consult behind the scenes, another plug for Dr. Alex. That's yeah. Can I get an amen or no? You're conspicuously silent now.
Thank you very much. I would be more than happy to assist.
Oh, good. All right, good.
Helping people get the services that are going to benefit them and that we put in place for this purpose is that's really my passion. So
Yeah. So I've been on my soapbox for probably the last, I don't know, how long was I talking? 20 minutes. But that's what I do. I preach. I preach to my people, but you are the expert. And so I would love to just generally like what I don't know how much of a front row seat you have to the advocacy we bring to the table at sentencing and how it matters for the outcomes at BOP. But there's a disconnect there, I've already said, between what we know and what happens when they get there. Is there any perspective you can bring to bear with your expertise to tell us how to do better, how to be better at helping our clients?
sure. And I think it's two-pronged. So first, I think, and this is so general that it might sound really simple, but then I would ask, are you doing it? And that is talk about people in prison, not just when you're in the courtroom, but all of the time. Anybody that knows me on a purely social or neighborhood or mom level has heard me talk about these things. And it is amazing what people don't know. We live in a world that is, look at our fractured politics, look at, the environment and the economy. And there's lots of things for people to care about. But when you talk to them about prison, especially if they don't actually have a family member or someone close to them in prison, they suddenly become interested. And I know that because I have these little one off conversations with people. And then they start sending me articles like, oh my gosh, I saw this. Did you know this? It, it impacts their voting. It impacts their advocacy. Sometimes they go and volunteer. So my first bit of advice is like, yes, this might be your job, but make it more than your job and talk to people that you know so that they care about it because it takes a lot of people to make change. And you never know when one of them knows a judge and is educating them. But the other piece is much more specific. And it's honestly, it's a lot of what you said, Doug. It is particularly if your client has any kind of a special need, a challenge in their life historically or currently outside of just the contact with the justice system, make sure you're talking to somebody who's familiar with the services so that you can consider on the front end educating the court about what's out there and why you need it. The BOP takes recommendations from judges very seriously, and whenever they can honor it, they will. And so, if a judge doesn't know the skills program exists, why would they recommend it? And if you recall earlier, we talked a little bit about sometimes these are folks that, because of the very nature of what's going on with them, are struggling in prison. Their points are going up, they're getting in trouble. What if we can avoid that by sending them straight to the place that's going to be able to help them and give them a leg up when they enter into the correctional system? It's not that hard. And I'm certainly not alone, I'm available to help people if they have questions. And there are others that are knowledgeable about these things as well. So I
I
think
love
that's
that. I
nice.
love that. And I feel very validated because I talk about this this all the time on the LinkedIn's and on this podcast. And not everybody likes to hear what I have to say, but I guess you're saying it's important that we keep saying. And there's a lot of great people that are talking, that are speaking their truth about this system. And I guess I'm gonna have one more little sweet, maybe esoteric, philosophical sort of thing that I need your help, which is I know, okay, so I'm gonna give you an example. A couple episodes ago, I posted, it was episode 99, and it was just horror stories from the BOP, just things that I've experienced from my representation and that have just broken my heart into a million pieces. And again, we're not doing that today, but one of the things that I talked about was the government had made this argument in this case that I was helping on that they should be the client should be immediately taken into custody at sentencing because they were a risk of flight by suicide. In other words, that they would rather there was a risk that they would rather end their own life than await their fate at the BOP. And I thought that was a horrible argument, a disgusting argument, a vile argument, but also a telling argument, which is to say even the government knows that the BOP can be exceptionally punitive. And so, I do this thing on these podcasts, and then every once in a while I'll get somebody who comes on and makes a comment, on the YouTube page or whatever. And it's it's a common theme, which is that a lot of the public has this idea of, so what? Like, yeah, that's how prison is supposed to be. And I literally had a comment on this last episode said, am I missing something here? I was under the impression that prison is supposed to be terrible and horrible and all that sort of stuff, since after all, it's meant to be a deterrent. You, as average Joe, are supposed to know that prison is absolutely terrifyingly horrible in order to motivate you to do everything you can to never have to set foot in one. It's not supposed to be something where you look at some choice like a menu at a hamburger place and picking between a plain burger or a cheeseburger and pick one based on how you feel. After all, the choice isn't a major one, cheese or no. I don't know. He gets goes on about pickles and cheese, but the point is, like, the point is, I would want to respond to this guy. What the fuck's the matter with you, man? But I think you'd have a more diplomatic and well-reasoned response based on your 30 years and your experience as a psych professional about what the mission should be and what the goal must be and why. And I just wondered if maybe that's the place where we could end this with your
Sure.
thoughts on that.
I mean, I'm sure you could see my face at some of the what? No, I wholeheartedly disagree. Ew. So yeah, I that's not correct, that Mr. Cheeseburger opinion. I Prisons are in fact places where people can and should be able to make choices, because they are supposed to be places where people learn to do something differently and, in fact, make some different choices and get to learn from both successes and failures from those in a structured place, so that when they come back out, they reintegrate into society is better, healthier, stronger, whatever was lacking. When you look at the history of prisons, of course, there are some dark things, but for a very long time in corrections in the US and internationally, prisons were places that, yes, there was a security component, but half of the BOP's mission and of most places is the other part, the getting better, the learning new skills, the habilitating, when you look at who's coming into prison, a lot of them are individuals that didn't have it great to begin with. Maybe they didn't learn some of the basic skills. Maybe they didn't have some of the basic resources. Maybe they had undiagnosed issues. Maybe there were poverty, financial abuse, you name it, complicated web of issues. These weren't supposed to be places where we did additional terrible punishment things. That's such a disgusting idea. And I assure you, I would have never worked in the system if I thought that was the case. These are supposed to be places where the punishment is removal from society. That's the end of the punishment piece. That's it.
Yeah.
The rest of it is now you are in a safe space. And when it's not safe, we need to look at why. Safe prisons are busy prisons. And by that, I mean people are working, people are getting treatment, people are exercising. We have a lot of unhealthy physically individuals that don't need mental health treatment or the like, but they need better medical care. And so those are the things that are supposed to be happening in prison. And if they're not, we need to talk about it. But we should definitely be shutting down this idea that prisons are supposed to be hellscapes that people go to be tormented. That's a horrific and inhumane idea. Prisons are, in fact, just made up of people, people that live there, people that work there, and they should mirror the community to the extent possible.
I knew you were going to hit that one out of the park, and that gives me hope. We know that there's an ideal. It's not always recognize, but as long as it's there and out there and something to aspire to, there's hope. And sometimes, hope is all we need to get through the day doing what we do. So thank you. I want everybody to know how they can connect with you, Dr. McLaren. And so email is probably a good way. And I'm going to spell your name because people won't know how to spell it based on how we're pronouncing it. But Alix is Alix. Last name McLaren is McLaren. So Alix McLaren at gmail.com would be your email. She's available in a limited. Since she's fresh off the BOP boat. She's sort of easing her way into this, so more behind the scenes consulting right now as opposed to testifying in court and drafting declarations. But she can help you with all of those things behind the scenes, especially programming policies. But her areas of expertise, more specifically, are the things we've talked about today, and that's programming and the skills program, women's issues, RDAP, those kinds of things. But she really has a broad and deep perspective and can be a great help for you. So I encourage you folks to reach out to the resources that we have, and always, always, always tell the story of prison at sentencing. Dr. McLaren, thank you so much, and I can't wait to see what the future holds professionally for you and me, because I fully plan to give you more work than you know what to do with in quite a short order. So thank you for doing this, and I hope that we can do it again on some other topics soon.
I would love it. As you can see, I like to talk, and thank you for being here, and thank you for caring.
That's it for today, but before we go, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you to you, the listener, for spending time with us today getting set for sentencing. Whether you're a lawyer, someone who could use the help, or maybe you're just a true crime buff who loves the inside scoop on how this whole thing works, I am so glad you're here, and I hope you keep listening. If you're interested in knowing more about what I do, mitigation videos, case consults, live teaching, on-demand educational content, books, articles, all of it, please visit www.dougpassonlaw.com. I'm Doug Passon. Until next time, hang in there. Wait a minute, that's a stupid way to sign off a podcast about sentencing. Hang in there. What's the matter with you, man? I guess they call that gallows humor. Sorry. All right. Well, I will see you next time on Set for Sentencing. Bye-bye.